Welcome everybody to the session that's titled "What Really Happened in Helena?" If you're from Helena, you know that our two topics today, you've read this description, which I'll introduce here in a second. We're gonna be talking about topics that are, I think, deeply embedded in Helena's memory. And we've got, I think, great potential to have some really good discussions, interactions, and content brought to us. If you're from Helena, I know if you're looking forward to it like I am. My name is Aaron Jenton. I work with the Montana Historical Society on behalf of the institution. I'd like to thank everybody for their great support of the conference so far. And we couldn't do this without great support from our state like we have had at this conference. So thank you, and thank you to our sponsors for helping to make this possible. Our structure today is going to be like you'd expect. We've got two speakers. They'll each have about 30 minutes, and we'll have time for questions at the end. So please hold all your questions to the end. I will mention that if you have not silenced your cell phones, please remember to do so before we get too deep into this time today. Our two speakers, the first speaker today is going to be Paul Cartwright. Paul works on history of urban renewal in Helena. As a former city commissioner, he is familiar with many of the ways government projects can succeed, fail, and evolve. Prior to retiring, he worked on energy policy for the state of Montana, including promoting walkable communities. And his presentation, as you're seeing the title here, is Heartbreak Hotel, Urban Renewal in Montana's Capital City. And he's going to discuss the actions of Helena First, which was a corporation that took the lead of the city's urban renewal efforts starting in 1968. I'm intrigued by this because often you hear about urban renewal in the context of losing all these buildings instead of gaining some. So this is personal for me. I'm intrigued by it. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Paul.
Okay, so what I have today is a story about the way cities happen. And this particular story has three strands. The first is urban renewal. That was a huge publicly funded program back in the 70s that Helena tore down most of its downtown and rebuilt some of it. Then there's Helena First. That was a company created by local bankers, real estate and insurance men. They thought that private money could jumpstart the revitalization of their hometown and make way for urban renewal. And then finally, there's the hotel itself. That was a centerpiece in both these efforts. And for the last 50 years, it's been the only hotel in Helena's old downtown. So it opened in 72 as a travel lodge. It's now a DoubleTree. It's had some additions, as you can see. Of the buildings put up during urban renewal, only 5 were constructed with private money. This was the first, and it was the largest. So one thing I have to make clear, it's not like the guys of Helena First were the ones that were the only ones promoting urban renewal. There were a lot of people in on it, but they were the first and probably the most significant group. And their decisions shaped both what urban renewal could do and a lot of what it could imagine doing. So you could walk away from the story today thinking, well, this shows how the rich and powerful control the town. And I really hope that's not news. But what I find more interesting is how their influence didn't play out the way the rest of us like to think we know how it works. And of course, it didn't work out the way they thought it was going to either. So urban renewal, federal program, what's around now, there's still urban renewal programs around, but a pale imitation of what we had in mid-century, last century. It's a nationwide program. The idea was to knock down slums, blighted areas was the term of art, and make the land attractive to developers. They put a lot of money into it, into a lot of towns. That 10 billion is probably closer to 100 billion in today's dollars. So big money and lots of towns. Helena was not unique. The key thing to remember, though, is that while the projects were federally funded, they were locally designed. In Helena, the active part was in the 70s. And then after it was gone, buildings continued to be built on land cleared by urban renewal. And the most recent one to go up on old urban renewal land was just 2009. So this has been stringing along for a long time. It brought in big money from the feds. But the important caveat is to remember where you put your water glass. The important caveat is that urban renewal was never in the business of putting buildings up. It's not how Congress structured the program. Instead, what urban renewal did was clear the land, clean up the titles, put in infrastructure, and then sold resulting lots. It was up to other public programs or private developers to actually build the buildings. So there's kind of a little disconnect in this program. I see a lot of you from Helena, but for those of you who aren't, I hope you can read aerial photos. This is a recent photo. It gives you an idea of how big urban renewal was. The city county building is there, old field of bedding there. This is the walking wall going along in there.
Yeah, you're
Sorry,
right.
show that first.
Should be done.
Maybe if I talk to him.
Let me use the laser pointer.
Oh, just one more. Okay.
Sorry.
Button at the top. Okay. That's not the button at the top. It doesn't. That button, the button at the top in the middle, not the button at the top of the top. So the button at the top in the middle says, stop it. I knew that was going to happen. You know, way over in the corner, city corner building. Let me try once more to see if I can.
Do you want me to point for you?
Well, you seeing eye dog?
That would be the hotel right there.
Okay, aha,
There you go.
there we go. There's the city county, the old federal, the walking wall running along there. So the urban renewal area was 6th along there, all the way over to the South Hills, which are off the map, Warren up here, and down to Benton, which runs right about there. So it doesn't include some of the residential at the bottom and some of the commercial on the far side there. But what you see here is lots of parking, lots of big high volume roads, the walkable commercial center area in the center, the walking mall. And what this should remind you of is an old style shopping mall. And the reason it should remind you of that is that's what they were actually going for in about so many words. They wanted to make, the goal was to make downtown like a shopping center, only better. So some things had to be moved. That's the same aerial taken right before the start of urban renewal. So we've lost the pointer again, so. And we've lost that again. You know, we could go down for beer and just talk about this. That. And that. And that doesn't do anything. Folks, you'll have to make it out. Far corner, city county. The new federal building, the federal building is right in here. Those trees are back of the library. Last Chance Gulch is kind of a little bit above the center. So you can see that there are pretty damn big changes. A lot of buildings went missing. And so you have to understand, you can understand why people who disliked urban renewal called it urban removal or urban disposal. This is the south end of the town, South Main. But those derogatory terms came up later. Because whatever people thought about urban renewal afterwards, but think of it now, there was widespread agreement at the time, including in the entire downtown area, south and north, that something had to be done. The main commercial area between 6th and Broadway was starting to fray. The area south of Broadway, that's where the old mining camp was. That's it. You're basically looking at the heart of the mining camp there. Those trees are the ones that are still there by the neighborhood center on the playground. So they built that around that. The interstate Capitol Hill Shopping Mall, other developments, everything was pulling away from the downtown. So there is a real problem, and it was clear that something was going to happen one way or another. So before we get in, this is the prelude. Lots of money, lots of agreement that something should happen. Not totally clear what that something was supposed to be. So though things were falling apart, the Chamber of Commerce had been working for a long time trying to promote the downtown. It started in '52 when Main Street was renamed Last Chance Gulch to attract tourists. That was the argument. We need to attract tourists. They got Main Street paved. Again, the Chamber of Commerce business people pushing to make it happen. And in the '60s, they were pushing for more parking. What you see here is their success story. It was a parking lot built in 1964 by Helena Parking Incorporated, which is a fairly obscure title, I realize, but that was the name they went with. They were a group of businessmen who raised the money themselves, built 2 parking lots, and then gave them to the city. Wasn't much parking, 76 spaces, something like that. But the gain was a lot of experience in development. 3 of the officers of that citizen corporation went on to become founding members of Helena First. And most of the Helena First board had been active in these kind of downtown efforts. So this has been going on for a long time. The initial hint that there was going to be an organization like Helena First appeared in the spring of 1967. This was when the city applied to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, for a model cities planning grant. And back in the good old days, you could apply for a planning grant to get you a larger grant to follow up with. So the model cities grant had a big impact on its own, but all you need to know for this story is that it came before urban renewal, and it was often confused to be the same thing as urban renewal. It wasn't. The other thing you need to know about model cities and then urban renewal is back then the mayor would appoint citizen advisory committees to prepare applications for these major programs, for these big grants. They did the work, not city staff. So the Chamber of Commerce business people, volunteers were really important in getting the money in. And then 5 of the citizens appointed to the Model City Advisory Committee actually end up on the board of Helena First when it incorporated. Long continuity is the point here. And it's no surprise. They said, private development is waiting. Somehow the grant application knew this. They didn't have to work with computers. So this promise of private support was actually one of the reasons that Helena got the Model City grant and then the Urban Renewal grant. Larry Gallagher, who took over director of Urban Renewal in '72, he said that he didn't think that we would have gotten HUD approval without Helena First, without this promise of big money coming in as investment. So it wasn't just because of Mike Mansfield that he was Senate Majority Leader at the time. It wasn't just because of him that Helena got the grants. The future Helena First was a major factor as well. And this is the original board of directors from their minutes. I hope you can read that in the back. But you see a lot of banks, insurance, investments. You know, some of you will know those names. So Helena First incorporated in September of '67, and this was 6 months before the Model City Planning Grant was issued, and 9 months before the Urban Renewal Planning Grant was issued. They were on the ground, and they were, as you would expect, a very respectable bunch, longtime residents. 6 of these 11 were born in town. The rest were native Montanans, except for one guy that snuck in from North Dakota, but that had been 40 years earlier, so I guess they'd forgotten it by then. They were almost all in their 40s to early 60s. They were, as you can see, banking, real estate, insurance. A couple of ex-legislators are on that list, an ex-mayor. And the intent of Helena First was, in quoting them, to restore the dignity of Helena's downtown business area. And they called themselves, again, this is a quote, a privately sponsored urban renewal plan. And their solution, build a hotel and a convention center. Which is a good idea. For two reasons. First, the Placer had been the premier hotel since the turn of the century. And it had fallen on hard times. More importantly, it was no longer even the real seat of power. The transoms were closed. They moved actually out to the colonial, but that's a separate issue. And then there was another good reason for a hotel convention center. There was a vacant lots in the center of the commercial district that need to be filled. The two second-rate hotels across from the Placer had burned not long before Helena First and Urban Renewal appeared. In '65, it was the Martha Hotel and some adjoining buildings. In February of '67, right when they were writing the application of why they needed to improve the downtown, the Harvey burned. These two hotels and surrounding buildings left a 170-foot gap in the main commercial district. You can see, this is an older photo, but there's a Harvey and the Martha. The Placer is the building on the far left. The Lalonde where the Woolworth used to be and the Gamers are still there. The white one, that's the existing buildings. But everything up to the very tall building, you can barely see the old Union Bank, disappeared. It's a big hole. So getting a hotel built is harder than it sounds for those of you who haven't built hotels. So first of all, you have to find an operator or an owner. Helena First approached 21 hotel chains, 21 turned them down. Competition, this building we're in right now. It was a real problem. This hotel opened before Helena First even broke ground. It was built in the 70s, early 70s. They had to put their investors up here because it was the only decent hotel in town, but they're trying to sell them on the need for a hotel downtown. The spokesman said, I have to admit, the Colonial, very plush and has a very extensive convention facilities. It's not a good bargaining position. Finally, though, at the end of '69, they began to talk to the Pearson Group, which is a small family operation out of Salt Lake City that had 10-ish hotels around the area. The Pearsons agreed to operate, but not to own the new hotel. And so with that, they were able to start construction in 1971. Here's the hotel again. We just had a bunch of architects talking about mid-century modern, which Helena titled the design of their hotel. The architects I've talked to said the design headed in the direction of mid-century modern, but maybe didn't quite get there. And you'll notice, but they called out the European style balconies. No, this is important. They're 2 feet deep, but they're European style. You should also note that the entry is on the north side, nowhere near Broadway. They'd hoped that Grand Street was going to stay open, but that's where they put it. So they got it open, and then they immediately started fighting with the operators. They ended up terminating the contract with the Pearsons in 1980. They went through 3 more operators, contractual failures, default tax payments, fires, all sorts of stuff. And finally, they gave up. They sold out the hotel to the last operator in 1991, paid out the shares, and went into history. That $1.38 payout on $1 share is about 41 cents in inflation adjusted at that time. So you could say it was pretty heartbreaking in terms of what they started out with. The thing is, though, urban renewal would not have been the same without them, and that's because they had visions much bigger than just a hotel. So this was their opening offer was hotel parking on the other side. We'll just knock down these old buildings, starting with the securities, going to the Pittsburgh block. Then we'll have the parking we need because they own the other lots on the west side. But within 2 months, the vision expanded. William Curran came in. He's a developer from Missoula, pitched up in Helena, said, I have the solution. He came in just 2 months after they opened in November of '67. And he was ready to level the securities and halfway down the block, he was with that. But then as he looked at it, it got bigger. So by March of '68, the proposal was to cover the entire block between the Placer and 6th. It was going to have retail, parking for 300 cars on 3 levels, 125 unit motel, bells and whistles all over the place. It didn't happen. The Helena First had a falling out with Curran, but not with this concept. And that's where Bill Clark comes in. William Clark was a small business administration lawyer. He was advising Helena First on SBA loans. He was also the grandson of an old Helena family and with the banking and insurance background himself, conveniently enough. So he polished up Curran's idea, and then he suggested how SBA could fund that new idea. Full service government. So his proposal was to leave the hotel on the west side in those empty lots, but take out the east side nonetheless. 1-story shops parking on top of that. So inspired by that, Helena First went on a buying spree. They bought 6 buildings during 1968, all the way down to the Safeway, and were ready to buy more. But eventually, that idea didn't fly either. But they had all these buildings, and Clark tried to dial back his vision to just half of the block. That didn't work either. Mainly because the bankers on Helena First board were getting worried about so much property, so little income. They did have one rental. Boy Scout Troop 107 rented the old Holter Hardware for a month to have a Christmas tree lot on the inside. And that was their entire take for that year. So by the end of '69, the board abandoned the idea of investing in on the east side retail. But remember, in '69, urban renewal plan was now finally being planned, and they picked up the idea. So retail office complex got written into the plan. What we ended up with was the arcade building. That was what was left of William Curran's idea. And that one was put up with public money also, though different pile of public money. But the arcade building was later. Well, that was falling apart on the east side. Helena First had still been busy on the west side. They were, let me see, for the orientation, the far side is 6th. That's Last Chance going towards the top. Park down there, the big building kind of in the center is the old Marlowe. The burned out holes of the hotels were turned into parking lots. You can see them in the shade of that one building, kind of a little off to the center. And then they bought up 2 pretty sad buildings on Park, Porter's Garage and Mother Holmes Apartments. Then they demolished them in July 1968 to make still more parking. And you can see this is shortly after they were demolished. But the buildings that Helena First were demolishing were going down the same time, like within a week of when the urban renewal director came on board. They were that far ahead of the city. And they were still serious about this convention center. That's why they bought those buildings. And they had to get 2 other buildings. The Union Bank building, the Wheat building, which is the kind of the white top large building in the center, and below that in the shade of the Marlowe is the Eddie O'Connell, O'Connell Bakery headquarters. And of all the buildings that Helena First was going after, those 2 were probably in the best shape. So the Wheat building was just south of the hotel, where the restaurant and the patio are now. Those are add-ons. It had been the Union Bank building till '59 when the bank moved down to Lawrence and Last Chance. The Wheat building was so called because it was owned by Hal Wheat. He was a major player in real estate, and he was chairman of the Citizens Committee that wrote the application for urban renewal planning grant. He was ready to sell to Helena First, but he wanted real money, and Helena First didn't have it. So they had to wait for urban renewal. Eddie O'Connell owned the O'Connell building, which is southwest of the hotel, and it's now part of the parking lot. It's headquarters of Eddie's Bakery, a regional operation at the time, his headquarters for his other things, like he had the concession stand at Yellowstone Park. Eddie was not of the same background as the Helena First board, and he wasn't interested in their plans. He wouldn't budge. However, he died in '72, and his children sold out to Urban Renewal the following year. So Helena First eventually got the Wheaton O'Connell buildings without having to buy the lots, without having to buy the buildings, and then nothing, not much. They kept talking about a convention center into the '80s, but this is long after Urban Renewal had closed up shop. But eventually talk faded away, and just like Helena First itself. And just like this presentation is going to do if I don't speak faster. This is the plan, the architect's rendering of the plan. The big building in the center was the Helena First Hotel. The Hotel Convention Center had not been a reasonable idea, and certainly wasn't before the Colonial was announced. But the location, the orientation, all that was baked into the Urban Renewal plan before Urban Renewal showed up. Helena First had chosen the location based on the property they held, not maybe a plan for the overall. And that wasn't the only way they shaped it. Don't forget that project on the east side, that they did it and did it with a vengeance. Then they had to sell it to Urban Renewal, and quite happily said, "We have done your work for you." But while this was going on, Woolworths, the McDonald's department store, they looked at boarded up buildings all along the side. Basically, the appearance of the buildings owned by Helena First drove home the idea that something had to be done. And this is before Urban Renewal was even going. So the accomplishments of Helena First, the short of their hopes, they got the hotel, but not the convention center and the retail. So that was their heartbreak. The question is, how much heartbreak should we have? So can I get an extra couple because the computer messed up on me? You okay? All right. Thank you, sir. Okay. So these are the construction guy on the far right, board members surround him. Two things struck me about this corporation. First, these guys did not seem to be top of the league. William Curran, who was a developer, that was his opinion on the matter. And it was reasonably accurate. This is part of their negotiations. It must have been entertaining negotiations. They didn't even have an official manager till a year after the corporation had started. And they lost things. They had no minutes. It was just a mess. Pretty casual for what's supposed to be a development company. And they were plenty confident. I'm going to skip a little bit, but Alex Cunningham was their spokesman. He's a son of local wealth. His father owned Montana Life. Anyway, as part of his negotiations, this is his statement to Eddie O'Connell as he's trying to convince him to sell the property. So it's important to have deep respect for the people you're working with. And Cunningham wasn't probably the only board member that had these thoughts, but he was definitely the one most likely to say the quiet part out loud. The second thing that struck me about the board, that many of the board members might have been aware of the shortcomings. This is a list of their investors, the first 100,000 where they set up the operation, most of the original 36. Then they sold shares $1 a pop to raise the rest of the money. This list also shows who they didn't raise money from. That's the original 11. They each got a symbolic $1 share. And then you notice after that, that's it. They held at that. That they weren't, the money guys weren't willing to put their own money in it. They put their company's money into it, but only a couple didn't. Miller owned the land, and Cunningham was just gung-ho all over the place, and he put in real money. But it got so bad that Cunningham even had to complain to the rest of the board that he was hearing criticism around town that over the fact the directors hadn't purchased stock. On the other hand, maybe that makes them the smart guys given the payout. But all in all, you get the feeling that the men of Helena First were in over their heads, and that most of the town were aware of that fact. Okay, to sum up, Helena First got the hotel built. Urban Renewal might not have happened without them. On the other hand, if Helena First hadn't set the direction, Urban Renewal might have taken a different approach to that block between 6th and Broadway. And to be fair, it might not have, because they were going for that shopping center only better. But we won't know. And that's, we just won't know what might have been. And so that's another reason we could call this the Heartbreak Hotel. Thanks.